When I was 22, my 5 older brothers watched me take my last breath in a sterile hospital room, their faces entirely devoid of grief. They had forced me to give up my kidney to save their beloved adopted sister, Mia. They told me I owed her. I died alone, listening to them celebrate her successful surgery down the hall. But fate is a cruel comedian. I closed my eyes as a broken woman and opened them to the peeling wallpaper of my childhood nursery. I was 6 years old again, and this time, I wasn't going to beg for their love. I just wanted it all to end. The stench of antiseptic and the rhythmic, mocking beep of the heart monitor faded into a sudden, suffocating darkness. Then came the pain, not the hollow, agonizing ache of organ failure, but a sharp, stinging sensation on my cheek. I gasped, my eyes flying open. I was no longer in the pristine, terrifyingly cold intensive care unit of St. Jude's Hospital. I was lying on a plush, dark red Persian rug. The smell of lemon polish and old leather hit my nostrils, a scent so intrinsically tied to my childhood that my stomach heaved. "Get up, Daisy. Stop crying. You're embarrassing yourself." The voice was like a bucket of ice water. I blinked through a haze of tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. Towering over me was Theodore. He looked so young. His usually lined face smooth, his broad shoulders practically blocking out the light from the massive chandelier above. He was 21 here, having just taken over the Harrington family empire after our parents' fatal car crash a year prior. Next to him stood Leo, only 8 years old, his face twisted in a mocking sneer, and hiding behind Theodore's impeccably tailored slacks was Mia. She was 7, clutching a dismembered porcelain doll and forcing crocodile tears to well in her wide, innocent blue eyes. She pushed me. "Nat," Mia wailed, her voice a pitch-perfect imitation of terror. I just wanted to play with her, and she pushed me, and then she threw herself on the ground to make it look like I did it. I stared at her. My breath hitched, trapping itself in my tiny, underdeveloped lungs. I lifted my hands. They were small, dimpled at the knuckles, trembling violently. I was wearing the scratchy wool dress I loathed. I am 6 years old. The realization didn't bring joy. It brought a wave of nausea so profound I had to press my tiny hands into the carpet to steady myself. I had lived 22 years of absolute hell in this house. I had spent 16 years begging for a scrap of affection from Theodore, Oliver, Sebastian, Tristan, and Leo. I had taken the blame for every plate Mia broke, every test she failed, every lie she spun. I had let them carve a piece of my body out to save her life, hoping that my sacrifice would finally make them look at me and say, "Good job, Daisy. We love you, our little sister." Instead, Theodore had signed my do not resuscitate order with the same pen he used to sign corporate mergers. "Are you deaf, Daisy?" Tristan's voice echoed from the grand staircase. He descended like royalty, already possessing the theatrical flair that would later make him a famous actor. He was 16, beautiful, and utterly heartless. "Apologize to Mia." In my past life, this was the moment I screamed. I had thrown a tantrum, kicking the rug, sobbing that Mia was a liar, that she had pushed me and broken my favorite doll. My hysterics had only cemented their belief that I was a deranged, jealous brat. Theodore had locked me in the attic for 2 days. I looked at Tristan. I looked at Theodore. I looked at Mia's triumphant, hidden smirk. A profound, echoing emptiness settled over my soul. The burning desperation to be loved by them, the fire that had driven every action of my previous life was gone. It was just ashes now. I didn't want to fight Mia. I didn't want their love. I didn't even want to be alive. God had made a terrible mistake sending me back. I was too tired to do this again. Slowly, I pushed myself up from the floor. My knees were bruised, my cheek stinging where I had hit the floorboard. I didn't brush off my dress. I didn't look at Mia. I just tilted my head back to look up at Theodore's stern, unforgiving face. "I'm sorry, Mia," I said. My voice was a hollow whisper, devoid of inflection, devoid of life. It wasn't the voice of a 6-year-old. It was the voice of a ghost. Silence descended on the foyer. Theodore frowned, a slight crease forming between his brows. This was the first time I hadn't fought back. Leo lowered his mocking fist, looking confused. Tristan paused on the bottom step. I pushed her, I continued, staring blankly at Theodore's tie clip. I am bad. I am sorry. I turned around. My small, clumsy feet shuffling against the hardwood floor, and began to walk toward the basement stairs. Where do you think you're going? Theodore barked, though the usual venom in his tone was replaced by a faltering confusion. To the dark room, I replied monotonously, referencing the windowless storage room they used for my punishments. I am locking myself in. Don't worry. You won't hear me. I didn't wait for his response. I descended into the shadows, leaving my 5 brothers staring after me in stunned silence. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of a bizarre, unsettling quiet in the Harrington estate. In my past life, I was loud. I constantly demanded attention, cried when I was ignored, and fought violently against Mia's insidious framing. But the reborn Daisy was a shadow. I learned to navigate the massive house without making a sound. I stopped going to the dining room for meals, sneaking into the kitchen at midnight to eat cold leftovers from the trash so the chefs wouldn't report me. I stayed in my room, staring blankly at the ceiling for hours, wishing my heart would just stop beating. My brothers didn't know what to do. At first, they thought it was a sulking phase, but as days turned into weeks, the oppressive weight of my silence began to suffocate the household. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Oliver, the second eldest and a 20-year-old pre-med prodigy, had come home for the weekend. Oliver was the analytical one, the cold observer who diagnosed my behavioral issues with detached cruelty in my past life. Mia, sensing that the lack of drama was making my brothers forget about her, decided to escalate. She cornered me near the top of the grand marble staircase. I was holding a small glass of water. They don't care about you, you know, Mia whispered, her sweet facade dropping to reveal the viciousness underneath. Nat told Oliver he wishes you were never born. I looked at her. In the past, those words would have shattered me. Now, I just agreed with him. I know, I said softly. Frustrated by my lack of reaction, Mia grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. She tried to yank the glass from my hand to spill it on herself, ready to scream. But her foot slipped on the polished marble. She tumbled backward. Instinct, a stupid, lingering human instinct, made me reach out to catch her. I grabbed her wrist, but her weight pulled me forward. We both went tumbling down the stairs. Pain exploded across my body. The marble battered my fragile 6-year-old bones. We hit the landing in a tangle of limbs. Mia immediately started screaming bloody murder. Footsteps thundered from the hallway. Sebastian, the 18-year-old artistic prodigy, and Oliver rushed to the scene. Theodore emerged from his study. "Mia!" Sebastian cried, dropping to his knees and pulling the wailing girl into his arms. "Are you okay? What happened?" "She pushed me," Mia sobbed, burying her face in Sebastian's chest. "Daisy pushed me down the stairs." Oliver knelt beside them, instantly checking Mia's head and limbs with practiced clinical hands. "She's bruised, but no broken bones," he announced, though his eyes burned with fury as he looked up at me. I was lying on my side, a few feet away. My left arm was bent at a sickening angle. The pain white-hot and blinding, but I didn't make a sound. I just lay there, staring at the dust motes dancing in the dim light. My head was bleeding, a warm trickle sliding down my temple, pooling on the floor. "What is wrong with you, you little psychopath?" Sebastian screamed at me. Theodore strode over, hauling me up by my good arm. The agony was excruciating, but I just let my head loll back, looking at him with dead, unfocused eyes. "Hospital, now," Oliver commanded, noticing the blood, though his priority was clearly getting Mia checked for internal injuries. At St. Jude's Hospital, the very place I had died in my past life, the familiar scent of bleach made me want to vomit. They put me in a small curtained cubicle in the ER, a nurse rudely handling my broken arm because the Harrington brothers had made it explicitly clear to the staff that I was a violent, disturbed child who had attacked her sister. A pediatric psychiatrist, Dr. Aris, was sent in to evaluate me while I waited for the bone to be set. He was a gentle-looking man with a grey beard. Outside the thin privacy curtain, I could hear the hushed voices of Theodore, Oliver, and Tristan. They were waiting to hear my evaluation, undoubtedly expecting Dr. Aris to recommend boarding school or an asylum. "Hello? Daisy? Doctor?" Aris said softly, pulling up a stool. "My name is Dr. Aris. I want to talk to you about what happened today. Your brothers are very worried about Mia." "I know," I whispered. "They say you push her a lot. Why are you so angry, sweetheart? What makes you want to hurt her?" "I didn't hurt her. But it doesn't matter. They won't believe me." My voice was flat, carrying a chilling resignation that made the doctor pause. "Let's try a different question, Doctor," Aris said, leaning closer, his brow furrowing, as he noticed my emaciated frame and the dark, bruised bags under my eyes. "If you had a magic wand, Daisy, and you could wish for anything in the whole wide world to make things better, what would you wish for? Do you want a new toy? Do you want your brothers to play with you more?" Outside the curtain, the shuffling of my brother's expensive leather shoes stopped. The silence was heavy. They were listening. They expected me to ask for an apology, or a pony, or attention. I turned my head slowly, looking out the small window at the grey sky. "I don't want a toy," I said, my voice eerily calm and clear enough to carry right through the fabric. "I want to die." Dr. Aris froze. His pen slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the linoleum floor. Outside the curtain, I heard a sharp intake of breath. "Daisy," Dr. Aris stammered, clearly horrified. You don't mean that. You're just 6 years old." "I am tired," I continued, turning my empty, hollow eyes back to the doctor. "I am so tired. I want to go to sleep and never wake up. If I am dead, Theodore won't have to look at me like I am garbage. Oliver won't have to fix the bruises. Tristan won't have to yell. Mia can have all of them, and they can be a happy family. I am just a mistake. Tell the doctor to give me the medicine that makes dogs go to sleep. Please, that is my wish." Crash. Just beyond the curtain, the sound of a plastic coffee cup hitting the floor echoed through the ER. Hot liquid seeped under the curtain gap. Suddenly, the fabric was ripped back. Theodore stood there, his chest heaving, his face ashen, drained of all its usual imperious color. Behind him, Oliver looked physically ill, his hand gripping the doorframe so tightly his knuckles were white. Tristan's beautiful face was twisted in a mask of absolute horror. They had hated me. They had considered me a burden, a nuisance, a cruel twist of genetics, but they had never, in their wildest dreams, imagined that their active psychological warfare had driven a 6-year-old child to beg for euthanasia. Theodore opened his mouth, his voice trembling, stripped of all authority. "Daisy, what did you just say?" I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. "I am ready to die, Theodore. You don't have to pretend anymore." The drive back to the Harrington estate was suffocating. Usually, the massive black SUV was filled with Mia's chatter, Sebastian's music, or Tristan's bragging. Today, it was silent as a tomb. I sat in the very back row, my arm encased in a heavy white cast, leaning my forehead against the cold glass of the window. I didn't look at them. I knew Oliver was staring at me through the rearview mirror. I could feel Theodore's rigid tension radiating from the passenger seat. When we arrived, the front doors opened to reveal Leo bouncing on his heels and Mia sporting a dramatic unnecessary bandage on her forehead. "Nat!" Mia cheered, running forward. "Did you punish her? Did the doctor say she's crazy?" In the past, Theodore would have scooped her up and glared at me. Today, Theodore stopped. He looked at Mia, really looked at her, and then looked past her to me. I was shuffling out of the car, looking like a broken little doll, clutching my cast to my chest, my face pale and indifferent. Go to your room, Mia, Theodore said. His voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that made the 7-year-old stop dead in her tracks. But Nat, I said, go to your room, he suddenly roared, the sound echoing off the stone facade of the mansion. Mia flinched, bursting into real tears for the first time, and scrambled up the stairs. Leo, terrified, bolted after her. I didn't react to the shouting. I just kept walking, my head down, making my way toward the back hallway. Daisy, Sebastian called out, his artistic sensitivity finally picking up on the bizarre, terrifying shift in my aura. Where are you going? Your room is upstairs. I am going to the dark room, I stated simply. I pushed Mia. I know the rules. I reached for the handle of the basement door. But before I could turn it, a large, warm hand clamped down on my good shoulder. It was Oliver. He gently but firmly pulled me away from the door. No, Oliver said, his voice thick, with an emotion I had never heard from him before. His grey eyes were bloodshot. No more dark room. Never again. He scooped me up into his arms. I stiffened instinctively, anticipating a blow or a harsh shake, my whole body going rigid as a board. Oliver felt it. I heard a sharp, ragged gasp escape his throat as he realized I was terrified of his touch. He held me looser, carrying me upstairs with a terrifying gentleness, bypassing my small, neglected room and carrying me straight into the master guest suite, a room twice the size of mine, filled with sunlight. He set me down on the massive, king-sized bed. Theodore, Tristan, and Sebastian had followed us up, hovering in the doorway like ghosts. I'll have the chefs make you some soup, Tristan said, his voice unusually soft, almost pleading. Whatever you want. Macaroni? Chicken nuggets? I am not hungry, I said, lying down on the edge of the bed and pulling my knees to my chest, facing away from them. Please, just let me sleep. They lingered for a few agonizing minutes before slowly backing out, closing the door softly. But the peace wouldn't last. The house dynamic had fundamentally ruptured, and the fallout was just beginning. Over the next few days, the brothers launched a clumsy, frantic campaign to fix what they had broken. But you cannot tape together a glass you've ground into dust. Tristan bought me a mountain of toys, dolls, dollhouses, stuffed bears larger than me. He piled them in the center of the room. I didn't touch them. They remained in their plastic packaging. When he asked me why I wasn't playing, I looked at him blankly and said, "Dead girls don't need toys." Tristan had to leave the room, and I later heard him sobbing in the library. Oliver practically moved his medical textbooks into the armchair in my room. He started tracking my meals, realizing with mounting horror that I naturally ate less than a toddler because my stomach had shrunk from starvation. He tried to feed me supplements, his hands shaking every time I flinched away from the spoon. But it was Mia's desperation that finally pulled the veil from their eyes entirely. Mia was losing her grip on her audience. The brothers who usually doted on her were completely consumed by the silent, dying ghost in the guest suite. So, a week later, she resorted to her old tricks. I was sitting in the living room, staring vacantly at a muted television. Mia walked in, holding a priceless Ming Dynasty vase that Theodore's grandfather had left him. She looked at me, a malicious smirk twisting her young face, and deliberately dropped it. The antique shattered into 1,000 pieces with a deafening crash. "Nat!" Mia screamed at the top of her lungs. "Nat! Help!" Theodore came running from his home office, followed closely by Sebastian. They skidded to a halt, taking in the scene. Mia crying over the shattered remains of the family heirloom, and me sitting perfectly still on the sofa. "She did it," Mia wailed, pointing her finger at me. I tried to stop her, but she got mad and smashed it. "She hates you, Nat. In my past life." This was when the screaming match would start. Theodore would look at the broken vase, his face purple with rage, and drag me out of the room. This time, Theodore looked at the vase. Then he looked at Mia. Then he looked at me. "Daisy?" Theodore asked, his voice shaking. Did you do this?" I didn't even look at the shattered porcelain. I looked directly into Theodore's eyes. There was no fear in me, no panic, just the absolute void of a soul that had already moved on. "Yes," I said smoothly, my voice dead. "I broke it. I break everything. I am bad. You should throw me out in the snow so I freeze. That would be a good punishment." Mia smiled triumphantly through her fake tears. "See, she admits it. Punish her. Nat." But Theodore didn't move. He stood frozen, staring at me. He wasn't stupid. He ran a multi-billion-dollar company. The pieces were finally sliding into place in his mind. He looked at the distance between the sofa and the shattered vase. He looked at my broken arm in its heavy cast, resting immobile on my lap. It was physically impossible for me to have lifted the heavy vase, let alone hurled it across the room. I had just confessed to a crime I clearly couldn't have committed. Simply because I wanted to be punished. Simply because I wanted to be destroyed. Theodore turned his head slowly, his gaze locking onto Mia. The illusion of the sweet, innocent, adopted sister shattered faster than the vase on the floor. "Maya," Theodore whispered. And the absolute, freezing terror in his voice made the little girl step back. "What have you done?" The silence in the living room was so absolute it felt like a physical weight. Theodore's gaze remained locked on Mia, his dark eyes wide with a horrifying realization that was currently tearing his entire worldview to shreds. "Nat?" Mia squeaked, taking another step backward. Her perfectly rehearsed tears faltered. For the first time in her life, the adorable, innocent facade wasn't working. "She did it. I saw her. Daisy has a broken arm, Mia," Sebastian said slowly, stepping out from behind Theodore. The 18-year-old artist looked at the heavy plaster cast resting on my lap, then down at the heavy shards of the Ming vase scattered across the Persian rug. "That vase weighs at least 15 pounds. She couldn't lift it with 2 hands, let alone hurl it across the room." Mia's face paled. She looked wildly between her 2 older brothers, her lower lip trembling this time, with genuine panic. She kicked it. It was on a pedestal 4 feet off the ground. Theodore's voice was dangerously low, a terrifying rumble that usually preceded the firing of a board of directors. He slowly turned his head to look at me. I was still sitting perfectly still, my eyes fixed on a spot of dust on the coffee table. I had confessed. I had looked him in the eye and begged to be thrown out into the freezing snow for a crime I physically could not have committed. Theodore took a shaky step toward me, dropping to his knees, so he was at eye level. His expensive suit pants absorbed the dust from the floor. He reached out a trembling hand, hovering an inch from my cheek but terrified to make contact. "Daisy," he whispered, his voice cracking. Why? Did you say you did it?" I blinked slowly, turning my hollow gaze to him. "Because it is easier. If I say I did it, you get to yell, and I get to go to the dark room. If I say Mia did it, you still yell, and I still go to the dark room. It saves time. I am very tired." "Theodore." A choked, ragged sound ripped from Sebastian's throat. He turned away, burying his face in his hands. Theodore looked like he had been shot. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a marble statue of grief. He slowly stood up and turned back to Mia. The little girl shrank back against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. "How many times, Mia?" Theodore asked. His voice wasn't a roar anymore. It was cold, clinical, and utterly devoid of the warmth he had showered on her since she was adopted 2 years ago. "How many times did she take the blame for you?" I didn't. She's lying. She's trying to make you hate me," Mia shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Enough," Theodore snapped, the sharp sound echoing through the cavernous room. "Go to your room, Mia. Do not come out until I tell you to." Mia burst into loud, hysterical sobs, hoping the sheer volume of her distress would trigger their usual protective instincts. But Sebastian wouldn't even look at her, and Theodore's expression was made of stone. Realizing she had finally lost, Mia turned and fled up the stairs, her wails echoing through the halls. Once she was gone, Theodore turned to the nearest intercom on the wall. He pressed the button, his hand shaking violently. "Mrs. Higgins, I need you to contact the security firm. I want every second of interior surveillance footage from the past 2 years pulled and uploaded to my private server. Tonight. In the past, there had been cameras in the hallways and common areas for security purposes, but Theodore had never bothered to check them when it came to our squabbles. He had always just taken Mia's word. He was going to watch them now. He was going to sit in his dark office and watch 2 years of systematic psychological torture. He was going to watch Mia pinch herself and scream. He was going to watch Mia break plates and place the shards in my hands. He was going to watch his own cold, callous dismissals of a little girl who just wanted her big brother to love her. I didn't care. The truth was out, but it brought me no satisfaction. I slowly slid off the sofa, my feet hitting the floor softly. "Can I go to sleep now?" I asked the room at large. Oliver, who had just walked into the room having heard the shouting, froze in the doorway. He looked at the broken vase, at Theodore's devastated face, and finally at me. "Yes, Daisy," Oliver said gently, his grey eyes shining with unshed tears. "You can go to sleep. I'll carry you." I didn't protest as he picked me up. I just let my head loll against his shoulder, closing my eyes, wishing the darkness would swallow me whole and never spit me back out. The house transformed into a mausoleum. The security footage had broken them. Over the next week, the Harrington brothers watched the horrifying reality of what they had allowed, what they had encouraged to happen to their own blood. Theodore locked himself in his study for 3 days. When he finally emerged, he looked 10 years older. He fired 3 maids who had been caught on tape ignoring Mia's bullying, and he stripped Mia's room of every toy, television, and privilege she possessed. Mia became a ghost in the house. The golden child was cast out, forced to eat her meals in her room, entirely ignored by the brothers who used to worship the ground she walked on. But their vengeance against Mia did not bring me back to life. They thought fixing the injustice would fix me. They thought that by removing the source of the pain, I would suddenly blossom into the vibrant, giggling 6-year-old they remembered from before our parents died. They were incredibly, tragically naive. A month passed. The heavy plaster cast on my arm was removed, leaving behind a pale, withered limb that I barely used. I spent my days sitting by the large bay window in the guest suite, staring out at the manicured lawns turning brown with the approaching winter. Oliver practically abandoned his pre-med studies. He deferred his semester at Harvard and moved back home full-time. He became obsessed with my physical health, bringing in a parade of world-renowned pediatricians, nutritionists, and child psychologists. Dr. Aris visited twice a week. He tried play therapy, art therapy, music therapy. He brought golden retrievers and finger paints. I just stared at him. "Daisy, your brothers love you very much, Doctor," Aris said one Tuesday, sitting across from me in the sunroom while Oliver paced anxiously in the hallway. "They know they made terrible mistakes. They want to make it up to you." I watched a dead leaf blow across the patio glass. When a flower dies because you didn't water it, pouring a whole bucket of water on it doesn't make it green again. Doctor. It just makes the dirt muddy. Dr. Aris didn't have a response to that. No one did. Tristan, the rising star of the acting world, cancelled his leading role in an upcoming summer blockbuster. The tabloids went wild, speculating about rehab or a scandal. In reality, Tristan was spending his days sitting on the floor of my room, reading fairy tales aloud to a wall. He bought out entire toy stores. My room was a graveyard of expensive, untouched porcelain dolls and perfectly constructed dollhouses. "Look, Daisy," Tristan said one afternoon, his voice raspy. He was holding up a custom-made replica of a castle I had once admired in a book months ago. "I had them build it, just like the picture. You can be the princess." I looked at the castle. Then I looked at Tristan. His beautiful face was lined with exhaustion, his eyes pleading for a single smile, a single spark of life. "I don't want to be a princess, Tristan," I said quietly. "Princesses get rescued. I am already in the dragon's stomach." Tristan dropped the castle. It shattered on the hardwood floor, a fitting metaphor for his heart. He fled the room, and I heard the distant slam of the front door as he left the house to get drunk. But the most devastating blow came from Leo. Leo was 8. He was the youngest brother, the one closest to my age, and the one who had been most easily manipulated by Mia's lies. He didn't understand the complex psychological guilt his older brothers felt. He just knew his little sister was broken and it was his fault. One evening, Leo crept into my room. He was holding a battered, faded blue shoebox. I found this in the attic," Leo whispered, his voice trembling. He sat at the foot of my bed. "When Nat told the maids to clean out your old room, they were going to throw it away. But I saved it. I didn't move, but my eyes flicked to the box. I recognized it. It was my treasure box from before my rebirth, the box I had kept hidden under my floorboards." Leo opened the lid with shaking fingers. Inside were hundreds of crumpled, tear-stained pieces of paper. They were crayon drawings. Leo pulled one out and smoothed it flat on the bedspread. It was a crude drawing of 6 stick figures holding hands under a smiling yellow sun. Above the figures, written in wobbly, misspelled letters, were the words, "I wish my brothers love me." Leo pulled out another. A drawing of Theodore holding a trophy with a tiny stick figure cheering at the bottom. "Nat is the best. I will be good so he is proud." Another drawing, this one of me crying alone in the dark room, with a giant, terrifying monster labelled Mia outside the door. "Please save me, Ollie. I'm scarred." Leo began to hyperventilate, the physical evidence of my desperate, agonizing love for them. The love they had stomped into the dirt day after day was too much for an 8-year-old brain to process. Tears streamed down his cheeks, dropping onto the faded crayon wax. "You loved us." Leo sobbed, his small shoulders heaving. He crawled up the bed and fell to his knees beside me. "You loved us so much, Daisy, and we were so mean to you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please, just yell at me. Hit me, please." He grabbed my small, limp hand and pressed it against his own tear-soaked cheek. I looked at the drawings. I remembered drawing them. I remembered the desperate hope that fueled every stroke of the crayon. It felt like looking at the artifacts of an ancient, extinct civilization. I felt absolutely nothing for the girl who had drawn them. She was dead. I gently pulled my hand away from Leo's grip. "Don't cry, Leo," I said softly, turning my face back to the window. "It doesn't matter anymore. Those are just pictures of a ghost." Leo's wails echoed through the house, summoning Theodore and Oliver. When they rushed into the room and saw the scattered drawings, the horrific testament to the love they had slaughtered, both grown men sank to the floor, weeping openly alongside their little brother. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of their shattered hearts wash over me, feeling nothing but a profound, suffocating exhaustion. The human body is intrinsically tied to the mind. When the soul decides it is done, the heart eventually follows orders. By the time winter fully set in, painting the Harrington estate in a blanket of suffocating white snow, my body began to give out. It wasn't a sudden illness. It was a slow, agonizing fade. Oliver diagnosed it as a severe case of failure to thrive, compounded by extreme psychogenic apathy. My organs were slowing down. I was 6 years old, but my resting heart rate was terrifyingly low, my blood pressure plummeting. I stopped eating entirely. Not out of protest, but because the physical sensation of swallowing felt like swallowing sand. Oliver resorted to an IV drip, turning my grand guest suite into a makeshift hospital room. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor returned, a cruel mockery of my death in the previous timeline. One freezing January night, the fade reached a critical threshold. I was lying in bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, when a strange, cold numbness started in my toes and began creeping up my legs. My vision blurred at the edges, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching and warping. My breathing became shallow, each inhale requiring a monumental effort I simply didn't possess. The heart monitor next to my bed began to emit a rapid, frantic alarm. The door burst open. Oliver, who had been sleeping in the armchair in the corner, sprang up, knocking a tray of medical supplies to the floor. "Daisy!" he shouted, his hands flying over my tiny body, checking my pulse, my pupils, the IV line. "Nat, Sebastian, get in here. The house erupted into chaos. Theodore sprinted into the room, wearing only his suit trousers from the day before, his hair a wild mess. Sebastian and Tristan were right behind him. "What's happening?" Theodore demanded. His voice, a panicked roar. "She's crashing," Oliver said. His voice entirely stripped of its usual calm medical detachment. He was trembling violently as he prepped a syringe. "Her blood pressure is bottoming out. Her heart is giving up." "Do something," Tristan screamed, grabbing his own hair. "Fix her, Ollie." "I'm trying." Oliver snapped back, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. "But there's nothing physically wrong with her that I can operate on. She's letting go." Theodore shoved past Oliver and fell to his knees right beside the bed. He grabbed my cold, limp hand in both of his massive ones. He pressed my hand to his forehead, his broad shoulders shaking with the force of his sobs. "Daisy, please," Theodore begged. The ruthless billionaire, the man who controlled empires, was reduced to a weeping child on the floor. "Please don't do this. Don't leave me. I know I am a monster. I know I failed you. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. I will give you the world. Just open your eyes. Please, little bird. Please fight. Little bird." That was the nickname my father used to call me before he died. Hearing Theodore use it sent a strange, distant ripple through my fading consciousness. I slowly turned my head. My vision was swimming, greying at the edges. But I could see Theodore's face. It was twisted in absolute agony, drenched in sweat and tears. Behind him, Oliver was weeping openly. Tristan was praying aloud, and Sebastian was clutching the doorframe to keep from collapsing. They looked exactly like they had in my past life, in the hospital room, right after Mia's successful kidney transplant. Except then, they had been smiling. They had been celebrating. The cosmic irony of it all almost made me smile. "Theodore," I whispered. My voice was incredibly faint, barely a breath of air over my vocal cords, but the room went instantly dead silent as they strained to hear me. "I'm here, Daisy. I'm right here." Theodore choked out, leaning closer, his eyes wide with desperate hope. "Do you remember?" I paused, fighting for enough breath to finish the sentence. "Do you remember the day it rained, and Mia broke my favorite snow globe?" Theodore flinched as if I had struck him. He remembered. He had locked me in the dark room for crying about it. "I remember, baby. I'm so sorry. I'll buy you 1,000,000 snow globes." I tried to glue it back together, I whispered, my eyes drifting shut. But the water was gone. You can glue the glass, but you can't put the water back. It's just broken glass. "Daisy." "No, don't talk like that. You broke the glass." "Theodore," I breathed out, the darkness finally rushing in to claim me, a warm, welcoming blanket against the biting cold of my life. "I am empty. Let me go." The final sound I heard before the void swallowed me entirely was the long, sustained beep of the heart monitor flatlining and the guttural, earth-shattering scream of my eldest brother. Down the hall, hidden in the shadows of her doorway, Mia watched the chaotic scene unfold. The brothers who had cast her aside were now utterly destroyed by the little sister they were losing. Her eyes narrowed, a toxic, venomous jealousy burning away the last of her childhood innocence. If Daisy died, they would mourn her forever. Mia would never get her crown back. She needed a plan. And as the paramedics rushed up the grand staircase to try and jumpstart a heart that didn't want to beat, Mia slipped away into the darkness, a dark scheme forming in her mind. The void was quiet. It was the first true peace I had felt in 22 years of my first life, and the 6 years of this miserable second one. There was no pain, no cold, no suffocating weight of my brother's hatred, or their equally suffocating desperate guilt. It was just an endless, comforting dark. Then, a brutal, unnatural jolt of electricity tore through my chest. It didn't feel like waking up. It felt like being violently yanked backward by my ribs. My eyes flew open, my mouth stretched in a silent, agonizing scream as my lungs instinctively dragged in a massive gulp of sterile, freezing air. The scent of ozone and burnt hair assaulted my nose. "We have a pulse," Sinus tachycardia, but she's back. Push another milligram of epinephrine. The voice belonged to a stranger in a dark blue paramedic uniform. He was leaning over me, holding thick, terrifying defibrillator paddles. My chest felt as though it had been crushed by a sledgehammer. I turned my head slightly, my vision swimming through a heavy, drug-induced haze. Theodore was pinned against the far wall of my bedroom by a second paramedic, fighting like a wild animal, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Oliver was on his knees, gripping the bed frame so hard his fingernails were bleeding, sobbing uncontrollably. I hadn't escaped. They dragged me back. The next few weeks were a blur of blinding lights, the incessant beeping of machines, and the sterile walls of the VIP intensive care unit at St. Jude's Medical Center. Dr. Jonathan Arris, the psychiatrist, was replaced by Dr. Philip Montgomery, the head of pediatric cardiology. My body had literally begun to shut down from sheer psychological trauma. I was tethered to a dozen tubes and wires. A central line fed nutrients directly into my jugular vein. I couldn't speak because of the oxygen mask plastered over my face, and even if I could, I had nothing left to say. My brothers never left the room. They rotated in shifts, abandoning their lives completely. Theodore formally stepped down as the active CEO of Harrington Industries, handing the reins to his chief operating officer, a ruthless man named Richard Vance. Wait. No. Richard Sterling. Theodore didn't care if the stock tanked. He spent his days sitting in a hard plastic chair beside my bed, reading dense medical texts he barely understood, desperate for a cure for a broken soul. He also brought in his elite legal team from Harrison, Ford, and Associates. While I drifted in and out of consciousness, I heard the hushed, frantic meetings. Theodore was transferring 50% of the entire Harrington estate, billions of dollars, into the Daisy Harrington Irrevocable Trust. He was setting it up so that neither he nor any of the brothers could ever touch it. It was absolute financial autonomy for a 6-year-old girl who didn't even want to see tomorrow. "It doesn't matter, Nat," Oliver whispered one evening, his eyes bruised purple with exhaustion. He was adjusting my IV drip, his hand lingering over mine. Afraid to touch my skin. Money won't fix her heart. The heart muscle is fine structurally. It's her. It's her will to live. It's completely gone. "I don't care," Theodore growled, his voice a raw, ragged rasp. "I will buy her the best doctors on the planet. I will buy her a new island. I will sit here until I rot. She is not leaving me. I won't allow it." I listened to them with a hollow detachment. They were treating me like a broken antique they had accidentally knocked over. They thought throwing resources at me would glue the pieces back together. They didn't understand that the glass had been ground into dust. But while the brothers were consumed by their grief and their frantic attempts at atonement, they had forgotten the snake they left in the grass. Mia had not been allowed to visit the hospital. She had been left at the estate under the strict supervision of a stern governess, Mrs. Gable. For a normal 7-year-old, the isolation and the terrifying reality of a dying sister would have brought remorse or at least fear. But Mia was not normal. She was a narcissist who had just been violently stripped of her supply. Through the grapevine of gossiping nurses and overheard phone calls between Oliver and the estate staff, Mia learned the horrifying truth. If I survived, she was finished. The brothers knew everything. They knew she had lied, manipulated, and systematically destroyed me. As long as I was alive, I was the walking, breathing evidence of their greatest failure, and they would spend the rest of their lives worshipping the ground. I walked on to make up for it. Mia realized that for her to regain her throne, the tragic, fragile little sister had to finally succumb to her illness. And she was tired of waiting for nature to take its course. I had been moved out of the ICU and into a private recovery suite on the 4th floor. I was breathing on my own, though my heart rate remained dangerously sluggish. The brothers were forced to return to the estate for one night to deal with a mandatory legal signing regarding our parents' remaining assets, leaving Oliver alone with me. But Oliver, severely sleep-deprived and running on fumes, had finally collapsed on the sofa in the corner of the room, falling into a deep, unshakable sleep. The room was bathed in the pale, eerie glow of the moonlight filtering through the blinds. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic hiss of my oxygen cannula, and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Then, the heavy oak door of the suite creaked open. I didn't turn my head immediately. I assumed it was a night nurse coming to check my vitals. But the footsteps were too light. They didn't carry the squeak of rubber-soled nursing shoes. It was the soft padding of stockinged feet. A small shadow detached itself from the darkness of the hallway and crept toward my bed. It was Mia. She was wearing a thick winter coat over her pajamas. Having clearly sneaked out of the estate and taken a cab, a terrifying feat for a 7-year-old, proving just how deeply calculating she was. Her blonde hair was a tangled mess, and her blue eyes, usually wide and innocent, were narrowed into dark, hateful slits. She stood beside my bed, looking down at me. I looked back at her. I felt no fear. I felt nothing at all. "You're ruining everything," Mia whispered. Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but with pure, unadulterated rage. "Nat won't even look at me anymore. He told Mrs. Gable, I'm a monster." Tristan threw away all the pictures we took together. She leaned closer, her breath smelling faintly of peppermint. "It's not fair. You're just supposed to be the punching bag. You're the ugly one. I'm the one they love. I'm the princess." I blinked slowly. "Then take the crown, Mia." "I don't want it. They won't give it back while you're here," she hissed, her face contorting into an ugly sneer. "You're doing this on purpose. You're pretending to be sick so they feel bad. But I know a secret, Daisy. I heard Oliver talking to the doctor. He said if your heart rate drops any lower, you'll die for real. They said you're too weak for any more medicine." She reached into the pocket of her winter coat. Her small fingers pulled out a heavy medical-grade syringe. It was pre-filled with a clear liquid. My eyes flicked to the syringe, then back to her face. I didn't recognize the medication, but given that she had access to Oliver's massive, unguarded medical bag back at the estate, it could have been anything. Potassium, insulin, something that would stop a weakened 6-year-old heart in seconds. "If you want to die so much, I'll help you," Mia whispered, a terrifying, manic smile spreading across her lips. She reached for the IV port on the back of my hand. I didn't pull my hand away. I just stared at her. Finally, I thought, an end. She uncapped the syringe. She aligned the needle with the rubber stopper of my IV line. "Goodbye, Daisy," she whispered. But before she could push the needle through the barrier, the room was flooded with blinding, searing white light. "Mia!" The roar was so deafening, so filled with absolute primal fury, that the windows literally rattled in their frames. Oliver hadn't been asleep. My brother launched himself off the sofa with a terrifying speed. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, his hand shooting out and wrapping around Mia's wrist with a sickening crunch. Mia screamed, dropping the syringe. It clattered to the linoleum floor, rolling away under the bed. "Ollie, you're hurting me!" Mia wailed, immediately defaulting to her victim act. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to wrench her arm away. "I was just trying to give her medicine! The nurse told me to!" Oliver didn't let go. He yanked her away from my bed, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated horror and rage. He was trembling so violently, I thought he might snap her arm in 2. He didn't scream again. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet, which was infinitely more terrifying. "I have a hidden camera in the floral arrangement on the bedside table, Mia," Oliver hissed, his grey eyes blazing with a murderous fire. "Because I was paranoid about the nurses missing a change in Daisy's vitals, I heard every single word you just said." Mia's entire body went rigid. The colour drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. "You didn't sneak past me," Oliver continued, his voice shaking with the effort it took not to hurl her across the room. "I saw you come in. I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to see if the little girl we brought into our home, the girl we chose over our own blood, was really capable of murder." He looked at the syringe on the floor, then back at her. "You just tried to kill your sister." The heavy oak door burst open again. Theodore, Tristan, and Sebastian, who had apparently just arrived back from the estate and been summoned by Oliver's frantic text message moments before Mia entered the room, stood in the doorway. They had heard the screaming. They looked at Oliver, who was holding a terrified Mia. They looked at the dropped syringe. They looked at me, lying perfectly still, the heart monitor, maintaining its slow, indifferent rhythm. Theodore stepped into the room. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely dead inside. The last lingering shred of love he held for his adopted sister evaporated in that very second, leaving behind nothing but cold, terrifying resolve. "Get her out of my sight," Theodore said to Oliver, his voice completely devoid of emotion. "Before I forget that she is a child." The departure of Mia from the Harrington estate wasn't the cinematic explosion one might expect. There were no more screams, no more shattering glass. There was only a cold, clinical efficiency as Theodore's security team packed her belongings into 3 nondescript black suitcases. She was whisked away in the dead of night to the Devereux Glenholm School, a facility built of stone and iron, designed for children whose souls were missing the gear that governed empathy. As the taillights of the car disappeared down the long, winding driveway, a heavy, suffocating silence returned to the mansion. But it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a house trying to remember how to breathe after being strangled for years. The recovery was not a straight line. It was a jagged, painful crawl. When I was finally released from St. Jude's in late March, the world was beginning to thaw, but I remained frozen. My brothers had spent the weeks of my hospitalization transforming the estate. The dark room in the basement had been physically demolished, the walls torn down and the space converted into a bright, airy laundry room with windows cut into the foundation to let in the light. My old, neglected bedroom had been sealed off, and the master guest suite, the one filled with sunlight, had been permanently registered as mine. But I didn't care about the architecture. I spent my first month home sitting in a velvet armchair by the window, watching the snow melt into muddy slush. I was 8 years old now, my body finally catching up to the age I was supposed to be. But my eyes remained those of a woman who had lived, died, and been dragged back against her will. The brothers changed. The imperious, untouchable Harrington men were gone, replaced by 5 ghosts of guilt. They took turns, trying to reach me, each in their own broken way. Tristan was the first to realize that material things were an insult to my trauma. He took every unopened toy, every designer dress, and every plastic castle he had bought in his frantic panic and donated them to a local orphanage. Instead, he started coming into my room once a day, sitting on the far end of the rug and simply reading the news out loud. No fairy tales. No condescending little sister talk. Just the voice of a brother acknowledging that I was a person who existed. Sebastian, the artist, stopped painting his dark, moody abstracts. He moved his easel to the hallway outside my room. He didn't ask me to come out. He just left the door cracked, so I could hear the rhythmic scritch-scratch of his charcoal. Occasionally, he would slide a sketch under the door, not of me, but of the stray cats in the garden or the way the light hit the oak trees. He was showing me the world was still there, waiting for me whenever I was ready. Oliver, the one who had seen the needle in Mia's hand, was the most haunted. He abandoned his medical aspirations entirely. He couldn't look at a syringe or a white coat without trembling. He became the architect of my physical survival, meticulously overseeing my nutrition and sleep, but he did it with a newfound humility. He stopped being my doctor and started trying to be my brother. He would sit in the chair opposite mine for hours, both of us in silence, until one day he simply reached out and placed a small, polished stone on the table between us. "I found this by the creek," he whispered. "It's been tumbled by the water for years. It's smooth now, but it's still the same stone." It was the first time I felt a spark of something other than emptiness. A recognition of shared survival. Theodore, the eldest, had the furthest to fall. He had been the one to sign the orders, to believe the lies, to enforce the darkness. He had stepped down as CEO, a move that sent shockwaves through the global markets. But he didn't care. He was a man who had realized he had built a kingdom on the bones of his sister's spirit. One evening, as the first roses of June began to bloom, I walked out onto the back patio. Theodore was there, sitting on the stone steps, looking out at the gardens. He looked older, grey hair was peppering his temples, and the sharp, arrogant edge of his jaw had softened into something resembling grief. He didn't turn around when he heard my footsteps. He didn't want to startle me. "The white roses are the strongest," I said. My voice was small, but it was steady. Theodore's shoulders shook. He didn't sob, but the air he let out was jagged. "They are. They survived the frost." I sat down on the step 2 feet away from him. I didn't touch him. I wasn't ready for that. Maybe I never would be. The Daisy who wanted to be held by her big brothers had died in that hospital bed in another life, and she wasn't coming back. But the Daisy who was here, the one who had survived the rebirth, was learning to live with the scars. "I don't forgive you, Theodore," I said, watching a swallow dive toward the pond. "I don't think I can. Not for the dark room. Not for the way you looked at me when I was 6. Theodore nodded, his head bowed. "I know. I don't ask for it. I don't deserve it. But," I continued, taking a breath of the sweet evening air, "I am tired of being a ghost. I think I'd like to try being a person again." Theodore finally looked at me. His eyes were wet, filled with a desperate, agonizing gratitude. He didn't reach for me. He knew the rules. He just gave a small, shaky nod. "Then we'll stay here," he whispered. "As long as it takes. We'll just stay here in the light." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Harrington estate in shades of gold and violet. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I didn't wish for the end. I just watched the shadows grow long, knowing that when the night came, the doors would stay unlocked, and I would finally be able to sleep without fear. And that is the heartbreaking, intense conclusion to Daisy's story. If you were holding your breath during that hospital scene, absolutely smash that like button. I am so glad Oliver caught Mia red-handed, and that Theodore finally did the right thing to protect his real sister. While Daisy's scars will never fully disappear, she finally found a safe space to just breathe. Did you love this ending? Do you think the brothers truly redeemed themselves, or is it impossible to forgive what they did? Let's get a massive debate going in the comments section below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video with anyone who loves dark, emotional Reborn stories. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next incredible story.